Welcome back to Black Rose Stories, where the darkest mysteries are rarely solved by a single dramatic clue. Sometimes, the truth arrives quietly. A timestamp, a receipt, a forgotten camera, a phone call that lasted only 14 seconds, a witness who remembers something that seemed completely meaningless at the time. And sometimes, the most important evidence begins with a sentence investigators have heard thousands of times. I wasn't there. For simple words. If they are true, they can eliminate a person from suspicion. If they are false, they can become the beginning of an entirely different investigation. Tonight, we are entering the world of alibis. Not the polished alibis of movies, where a brilliant criminal creates an airtight story that leaves detectives helpless. Real life is far more complicated, because creating a false alibi is one thing. Keeping it alive is another. A lie must survive time. It must survive witnesses. It must survive records. It must survive technology. It must survive unexpected questions. And, most importantly, it must survive reality. Reality does not need to remember a script. A liar does. Imagine a fictional case. A successful businessman is found dead late one evening. There are no obvious signs pointing immediately toward one person. Investigators speak with relatives, co-workers, neighbors, employees, and business associates. Eventually, one name begins appearing repeatedly. A former partner. The relationship between the two men had collapsed months earlier. There had been arguments over money, legal threats, accusations, and, according to several witnesses, considerable anger. Detectives arrange an interview. The former partner appears calm. He says he had nothing to do with the murder. In fact, he says there is no possible way he could have been involved. He was at home, all evening, alone. He remembers watching television. He remembers eating dinner. He remembers going upstairs around 10 o'clock. It sounds ordinary. And ordinary stories can be powerful because most real life is ordinary. Detectives do not immediately accuse him of lying. They ask questions. What did you watch? What did you eat? Did you speak to anyone? Did you leave at any point? Did anyone visit? What time did you go to sleep? At first, the answers seem simple. No visitors. No trips outside. No phone calls worth remembering. Nothing unusual. The detectives write everything down. And then they begin doing something suspects sometimes underestimate. They test the story. An alibi is not simply something a person says. An alibi is a claim about reality. And reality can often be checked. If someone says they were at work, investigators may look for access records, co-workers, cameras, computer activity, or other evidence. If someone says they were at a restaurant, there may be receipts, staff, reservations, payment records, or surveillance. If someone says they were at home, the evidence may be less obvious. But less obvious does not mean non-existent. Modern life creates traces. Phones connect. Vehicles move. Applications operate. Doors open. Cameras record. Payments occur. Neighbors notice. One trace may mean nothing. Several traces can create a timeline. Detectives discover that a camera across the street captured part of the suspect's property. The image is imperfect. The angle is poor. But sometime during the evening, headlights appear. A vehicle seems to leave. The quality is not enough to identify the driver. The detectives do not jump to conclusions. They return to the suspect. They ask again, "Did you leave home that night?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Now the statement matters. Not because detectives have proven where he went. They have not. But because his story is beginning to collide with independent information. More footage is collected from farther down the road. A vehicle resembling his appears several minutes later. Still not enough. Plenty of similar vehicles exist. Then investigators check another source. A traffic camera. Again, a similar vehicle. The timeline begins forming. When detectives conduct another interview, the story changes. The suspect now remembers leaving briefly. He says he forgot. Maybe he drove to buy something. It was unimportant. He cannot remember exactly where. This is where investigators become interested in something beyond the original allegation. Why did the story change? People forget things. Memory is imperfect. Forgetting a short trip is possible. A changed story does not prove murder. But investigators now have a reason to examine the explanation more carefully. Where did he go? Did he purchase anything? Was there a transaction? Does another camera show his route? Was his phone active? Every answer leads to another question. The suspect now says he went to a convenience store. Detectives check. There is no transaction from his usual cards. That proves nothing. He could have paid cash. They look for footage. The store's camera does not clearly show him. Again, not proof. But another camera places a similar vehicle somewhere inconsistent with his explanation. The story changes again. Now he says maybe he drove farther than he remembered. He was upset. He wanted to clear his head. Each change may have an innocent explanation. But collectively, they begin creating something investigators care about deeply. A pattern. One false detail may be memory. Several false details may be deception. And deception surrounding the exact period of a murder can become highly significant. This is the first weakness of a fabricated alibi. The liar must remember the lie. Truth is easier. If you genuinely spent the night with friends, those friends have their own memories. Your messages may support it. Your photographs may support it. Your transactions may support it. Your movement may support it. Reality built the story for you. A fabricated story has to be manufactured, and manufactured stories require maintenance. This becomes even more difficult when multiple people are involved. Suppose someone asks a friend to support a false alibi. The friend agrees. Now there are two versions of the lie. The two people must remember not only the invented events, but the exact details they agreed upon. What time did they meet? Where? What did they eat? Who else was there? How long did they stay? What happened afterward? The details may seem trivial, but investigators know trivial details can expose rehearsed stories. Imagine two witnesses say they spent the evening together. One says they began watching a movie at 8. The other says 7. That difference alone means almost nothing. Human memory does not operate like a clock. But suppose one says they ordered pizza. The other says they cooked. One says nobody else was there. The other casually mentions a third person. Now investigators want clarification. Perhaps there is an innocent explanation. Perhaps one witness simply has poor memory. Then phone records reveal the two people were not communicating until later that evening. A building camera shows one arriving much later than claimed. The alibi weakens further. Every additional person in a false story increases complexity. And complexity is the enemy of deception. This is why elaborate lies can become fragile. There are too many moving pieces. Too many memories. Too many records. Too many variables. The liar can control what they say. They cannot control everything else. Consider something as simple as weather. Suppose a suspect claims they spent an hour walking through a park on a particular evening. Months later, investigators discover there was severe rain at that exact time. Does that prove the story false? Not necessarily. People walk in rain. But now investigators ask more questions. Did the suspect mention the weather? Were they dressed for it? Were roads flooded? Was the park even open? Small details become tests. Or imagine someone claims they purchased coffee at a particular shop. The shop was closed that day. Now there is a problem. Perhaps they confused the date. Perhaps they meant another shop. Again, detectives do not automatically treat error as guilt. But when every correction appears only after investigators reveal contradictory evidence, the pattern becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. This is one reason experienced investigators sometimes ask questions even when they already know the answer. They are not simply gathering information. They are establishing what the person is willing to claim. If detectives already know a vehicle passed through a certain location, they may still ask, "Did you drive anywhere near that area?" The answer becomes evidence. If the suspect says no, investigators now have a statement that can be tested. Later, if objective evidence contradicts it, the question becomes why. This process can feel slow. It is supposed to. Good investigations do not depend on dramatic intuition. They depend on comparison. Statement against record. Memory against timestamp. Claim against footage. One fact against another. The movies often show an interrogation as a battle of personalities. The detective raises their voice. The suspect becomes nervous. A confession arrives. Real cases can be far quieter. The most damaging moment may happen days after the interview, when an analyst opens a file and notices that a timestamp makes the suspect's story impossible. No shouting. No dramatic music. Just a number. That is the power of independent evidence. People can change their stories. Records usually do not. But records are not perfect either. This matters. A phone connecting to a particular area does not necessarily prove its owner was there. Someone else may have had the phone. A surveillance image may be unclear. A transaction may have an innocent explanation. Technology must be interpreted carefully. Investigators can make mistakes when they treat data as infallible. A strong investigation uses multiple forms of evidence. Suppose a device appears in an area. That fact alone is limited. Then a vehicle associated with the suspect appears on camera nearby. A witness remembers seeing the suspect. A transaction occurs in the same general period. Now the pieces reinforce one another. This is corroboration. And corroboration is where weak clues become strong. False alibis also face another unexpected enemy: routine. Human beings are creatures of habit. We tend to use the same routes, the same applications, the same stores, the same payment methods, the same devices. Our normal behavior creates a baseline. If something suddenly changes on the night of a crime, investigators may ask why. Perhaps someone always carries a phone, but the device is unusually inactive for several hours. That inactivity alone does not prove anything. Phones run out of power. People turn them off. But if the same unusual period coincides with other suspicious evidence, it becomes another piece. Perhaps someone normally uses a credit card but unexpectedly uses cash. Again, not criminal. Perhaps they normally communicate constantly with another person, then suddenly stop. Not proof. What matters is the combination. Patterns become significant when several independent changes point toward the same period. A fabricated alibi may also collapse because of unexpected witnesses. A person plans carefully. They think nobody saw them. But ordinary life is full of people whose presence cannot be predicted. Someone walking a dog, a delivery driver, a security guard, a neighbor taking out trash, a cyclist, a taxi driver. None knows they are witnessing something important. Hours later, days later, sometimes months later, investigators ask questions. The witness remembers a vehicle, a person, an argument, a time. Witness memory must be treated cautiously. People can be wrong, but when testimony matches other evidence, it may become powerful. Imagine a witness says they saw the suspect's vehicle near an area at approximately 9:30. A camera shows a similar vehicle at 9:27. Phone evidence supports movement in the same general direction. Now the witness is not standing alone. The evidence is converging. The lie must now explain three separate sources. This is the central problem for anyone attempting to create a perfect alibi. The liar can prepare for predictable evidence. Reality produces unpredictable evidence. You may know about the camera outside a bank. You may not know about the camera installed 2 days earlier across the street. You may remember the people who usually work a night shift. You may not anticipate a replacement employee. You may think nobody noticed a vehicle. You may not know a neighbor's doorbell camera captured it. And even if a person somehow anticipates every physical record, there is still another unpredictable factor: human beings. A friend who agreed to lie may become afraid. A partner may become angry. A relationship may end. A participant may decide the risk is too great. A person may contact investigators. Now the false alibi is no longer simply competing with external evidence. It is competing with someone who knows it was invented. That creates enormous pressure. This pressure often intensifies after an arrest. Before consequences become real, participants may speak confidently about loyalty. After charges are filed, the calculation changes. Someone speaks with a lawyer. They learn the possible sentence. They realize another person may already be cooperating. Fear replaces confidence. The same people who created the alibi together begin wondering whether they can trust one another. Who will speak first? Who saved messages? Who told someone else? The structure begins breaking from inside. This is why criminal conspiracies are psychologically unstable. They depend on trust among people who have powerful incentives to protect themselves. A person who agreed to tell one lie may not agree to risk decades in prison for someone else. Investigators understand this. But responsible investigators do not simply pressure people into saying what police want. Cooperating witnesses can also lie. Someone may blame another person to reduce their own punishment. Therefore, investigators seek verification. If a witness says an alibi was fabricated, what supports that? Messages? Records? Cameras? Another witness? The goal is not simply to obtain an accusation. The goal is to determine whether the accusation matches independent evidence. That distinction is essential, because there is another side to the alibi story. Sometimes investigators believe an alibi is false, and they are wrong. This possibility must remain open. A suspect may behave nervously. Their memory may be inconsistent. They may initially lie about something unrelated. None of those facts automatically makes them a murderer. Suppose a suspect lies about where they were because they were having an affair. The lie looks suspicious. They do not want a spouse to know. They become evasive. Investigators may initially think the deception relates to the murder. Later, evidence reveals the true reason. The person was indeed somewhere else and had no involvement. This is why good detectives ask not only, why would an innocent person lie, but also, what alternative explanation could produce the same behavior? The justice system depends on that discipline. A false statement can be important. It must still be interpreted correctly. There is no universal behavior of guilt. Some guilty people remain calm. Some innocent people panic. Some innocent suspects provide terrible interviews because they are frightened. Others remember times incorrectly because trauma disrupts memory. Human behavior is messy. Evidence has to do the heavy work. There is also a dangerous myth surrounding body language. True crime entertainment sometimes suggests detectives can identify lies by watching someone touch their face, avoid eye contact, cross their arms, or move nervously. These behaviors are not reliable proof of deception. People avoid eye contact because of anxiety, culture, personality, neurodiversity, fear. Someone may appear confident while lying. Someone may look terrified while telling the truth. Serious investigations require more than reading gestures. A statement matters because it can be compared with evidence, not because a suspect looked strange while saying it. The false alibi becomes most powerful as evidence when it reveals consciousness of guilt. That phrase refers broadly to behavior that may suggest someone knew they had reason to conceal involvement. But even here, courts and investigators must be cautious. The logic cannot become circular. He lied because he was guilty, and we know he was guilty because he lied. That is not enough. The lie should relate meaningfully to the crime. Suppose someone falsely claims they never knew the victim. Investigators prove they had communicated for years. Why hide the relationship? Perhaps the relationship itself contains the motive. Perhaps there is an innocent explanation. Detectives investigate further. Suppose someone claims they never knew a second suspect. Photographs and records show repeated meetings. Now the lie may help establish hidden connections. This is where an alibi investigation can expand into a network investigation. One false claim leads to one relationship. That relationship leads to another person. That person leads to a financial transaction. The transaction leads to communication. The case grows. What began as a simple question, "Where were you that night?" becomes a map of hidden relationships. And the more complicated the map becomes, the harder the false story is to preserve. Time also works against lies. At first, the suspect knows exactly what investigators have asked. They tailor explanations accordingly. Weeks later, investigators discover new evidence. Months later, another witness appears. Years later, technology allows old evidence to be re-examined. The original statement remains frozen. The evidence keeps evolving. That imbalance can be devastating. A suspect may forget what they claimed 3 years earlier. Investigators still have the recording. Every new piece of evidence can be compared against the old story. This is why cases sometimes change years after the crime. A witness finally speaks. An old camera archive is found. A financial record is reinterpreted. Digital evidence becomes accessible through legal process. The lie that once seemed safe is tested again and again. A truthful alibi generally becomes stronger when independent evidence is discovered. A false alibi becomes more vulnerable. That is an important difference. Truth tends to accumulate support. Fabrication accumulates problems. There are exceptions. Records can be lost. Witnesses can be mistaken. Evidence can create confusion. But as a principle, authentic events usually interact naturally with the world. Invented events have to imitate those interactions. And imitation is difficult. Imagine telling a fictional story about yesterday. You can easily invent one paragraph. Now imagine investigators asking you to provide 50 specific details. What time did you wake? What did you wear? Who did you speak with? What route did you take? What was the weather? What did you purchase? How did you pay? Where did you park? Who was working? Which entrance did you use? What happened next? Now imagine every answer can be checked. The problem becomes obvious. The liar does not simply need creativity. They need impossible foresight. And the more important the timeline, the more carefully detectives will test it. This is why seemingly minor evidence can become decisive. A parking record. an automated toll, a work login, a receipt, a photograph containing metadata, a message sent during a supposedly inactive period. None looks dramatic, but murder cases are often built from unglamorous details. Real investigation rewards patience. Analysts may spend days studying records that would bore most people within minutes. Detectives may watch hours of footage for a few seconds of movement. Prosecutors may compare dozens of statements. The breakthrough may not feel like a breakthrough. It may simply be the moment when several independent facts finally point in the same direction. True crime stories often celebrate genius. The investigator who sees what nobody else can see. Sometimes that happens, but many cases are solved through persistence rather than brilliance. Someone keeps checking, keeps asking, keeps comparing, keeps refusing to accept an explanation simply because it sounds plausible. That persistence is dangerous to a false alibi. Because plausible is not enough. The story must match reality. There is another emotional reason people create false alibis. Fear. Not every lie is carefully planned. Sometimes a person panics during the first interview. They believe telling the truth about where they were will make them look suspicious. So they lie. The first lie creates a second, then a third. Eventually, they are trapped inside a story they never intended to build. This can happen even when the person did not commit the most serious crime under investigation. For example, they might have been involved in illegal activity unrelated to the murder. They fear admitting it, so they create another explanation. Investigators later discover the deception and naturally become more suspicious. This is one reason legal advice is important for people involved in serious investigations. The stakes are high. Poor decisions made out of panic can create enormous complications. But for someone genuinely involved in the offense, the problem is much deeper. The alibi is not merely hiding embarrassment. It is hiding the person's relationship to the crime. Every new contradiction can move investigators closer to understanding that relationship. And sometimes, the lie itself reveals the direction. Suppose a suspect claims to have been somewhere investigators never asked about. Why volunteer that specific location? Perhaps they are trying to distance themselves from another. Suppose they become strangely precise about one 10-minute period, but vague about everything else. Why? Again, this is not proof. It is a question. Good investigations grow from good questions, not assumptions, not intuition treated as certainty. Questions, then verification. That process protects both the investigation and the innocent. It is worth remembering that an alibi can be one of the strongest forms of exculpatory evidence. If independent records demonstrate a person could not have committed the crime as alleged, investigators must take that seriously. A theory should change when facts contradict it. This sounds obvious. History shows how important it is. Tunnel vision can cause terrible injustice. Investigators become emotionally committed to one suspect. Evidence supporting the theory receives attention. Contradictory evidence is minimized. An innocent person may be prosecuted. The real offender remains free. That outcome fails everyone. The victim, the innocent defendant, the family, the public. This is why evidence must be allowed to lead in either direction. A genuine alibi is not an inconvenience. It is truth, and truth is the purpose. So when investigators examine an alibi, they are not simply trying to prove someone lied. They are reconstructing time, minute by minute. Where was everyone? Who communicated? What can be verified? Which records exist? Which statements agree? Which do not? The timeline becomes a structure. Each independent fact acts like a support. Eventually, investigators can see whether the suspect's story fits naturally inside that structure, or whether it stands outside, held together only by repeated explanations. The perfect false alibi is therefore almost a contradiction. To be perfect, the liar would need control over everything. Every record, every witness, every camera, every future technological development, every person who knows the truth, every random coincidence, every memory, every question investigators may ask years later. No human being has that control. And this is where the fantasy of the perfect crime collides with reality. Criminal plans are designed by people. People are imperfect. They forget. They panic. They misunderstand. They trust the wrong person. They underestimate technology. They overlook mundane records. They believe one lie will end the questions. Instead, the lie creates more questions. That is perhaps the greatest irony. A false alibi is designed to remove someone from an investigation. When it collapses, it may place them closer to the center. Detectives begin asking why the person needed the story. What were they hiding? Who helped? What other claims were false? The investigation expands. One lie becomes a doorway, and behind that doorway may be an entire sequence of decisions. The first call, the meeting, the payment, the grievance, the hidden relationship. The truth investigators were searching for from the beginning. But let us return to our fictional suspect. His original claim was simple. He stayed home. Then footage suggested he left. His explanation changed. He went to a store. More evidence questioned that. He changed the story again. Now investigators discover a person who says they saw him much farther away. The witness alone is imperfect. Then another record supports the location. A financial connection emerges involving someone associated with the victim. A communication record reveals contact. The suspect denies knowing the person. Photographs later establish they had met before. Now detectives are no longer investigating one inaccurate alibi. They are investigating a hidden relationship. The relationship produces another lead, another interview, another record. Eventually, prosecutors are presented with a mosaic. No single piece necessarily proves everything. But together, the pieces tell a coherent story. The original lie has become only one part. That is how strong cases are built. Not by turning one suspicious detail into certainty. By layering evidence. The suspect's statement. Independent records. Witness testimony. Financial evidence. Digital evidence. Physical evidence. Each piece tested. Each weakness acknowledged. Each alternative explanation considered. This is the difference between suspicion and proof. And it is why the justice process takes time. Families may become frustrated. The public wants arrests. Media coverage demands answers. But speed is not the same as accuracy. A rushed case can collapse. A careful case can survive courtroom challenge. Defense attorneys will examine the alibi evidence closely. Was the camera timestamp accurate? Could another person have used the vehicle? Was the witness reliable? Did investigators interpret phone evidence correctly? Did the suspect actually lie? Or were they simply mistaken? These challenges are not problems to avoid. They are necessary tests. If the prosecution's theory is strong, it should survive them. If it cannot, the weakness matters. Justice is not finding a story that feels right. It is proving one. Beyond the courtroom, the psychology of false alibis reveals something deeply human. We often believe we can control how other people perceive us. We manage impressions every day, at work, online, in relationships. We choose what to reveal, what to hide. In ordinary life, this can work. But criminal investigations operate differently. Investigators do not have to accept the version of yourself you present. They can compare it with the external world. And the external world is difficult to manage. This is why deception under investigation creates such intense psychological pressure. The liar knows that one unknown piece of evidence may exist. One camera, one witness, one record. They do not know what investigators have. Every question becomes threatening. Why are they asking that? What do they know? Did someone talk? Was I seen? This uncertainty can cause further mistakes. Stories change unnecessarily. Participants contact one another in panic. Someone attempts to coordinate explanations. Those new actions create new evidence. The attempt to protect the original lie generates additional problems. The conspiracy begins feeding the investigation. That cycle can continue until the story becomes impossible to maintain. And sometimes, one person finally admits part of the truth. Not everything. People often minimize. They say they lied about the location but deny the crime. Then evidence reveals another part. Another admission follows. The truth arrives gradually, layer by layer, just as the investigation did. This is why confessions, when they occur, should still be verified. A confession is powerful. But even confessions can be incomplete or false under certain circumstances. Responsible investigators seek details supported by independent evidence. Justice should never depend solely on drama. Evidence remains essential. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson from the perfect alibi. The truth does not need to be perfect. It can be messy. You may forget whether dinner happened at 7 or 7:30. You may not remember exactly which road you took. You may confuse minor details. That is normal. A genuine account can tolerate imperfection because independent reality exists around it. A fabricated story fears imperfection because one crack can reveal the structure underneath. The criminal lie aims to create certainty. I was definitely there. I never met that person. I never left. I had no contact. Absolute statements feel strong. They can also become dangerous when evidence proves otherwise. So investigators listen. They document. And they wait for reality to answer. Sometimes reality answers immediately. Sometimes years later. But when enough independent pieces appear, a false story can become harder and harder to defend. And the perfect alibi becomes something else entirely. Evidence of an attempt to hide the truth. This is Black Rose Stories, where crime is rarely solved because someone makes one enormous mistake. It is often solved because small facts refuse to cooperate with a lie. A camera frame, a timestamp, a witness, a transaction, a phone record. One fact becomes two. Two become 10. And eventually, the story created to protect someone begins collapsing under the weight of everything they could not control. The lie may have been designed in minutes. The investigation may take months. But time favors evidence. Because the liar must remember every version. Reality only has to remain what it was. And somewhere between the first denial and the final contradiction, investigators may discover that the most important question was never simply, "Where were you?" It was, "Why did you need us to believe you were somewhere else?" That is where the perfect alibi ends, and where the real story begins. This is Black Rose Stories, and in the next chapter of our investigation series, we will follow something even more difficult to silence than a witness. Money. Because people may forget, people may lie, people may disappear. But financial records have a strange way of remembering relationships that nobody wanted investigators to see.